Chief Inspector Blartok of the Galactic Alliance of Noble Trade and Security, GANTS, had precisely 6 eyes, 14 tentacles, and 1 raging migraine. The migraine had a name, United Systems of Earth. More specifically, their so-called cargo fleet. He rubbed 2 tentacles against his primary cranial ridge as he stared at the latest sensor report. "Johnson," he said, his voice a tired gurgle. "Explain to me why this commercial logistics vessel has power output levels comparable to a planetary defense station." Gregory Johnson, the only human intern in the Bureau of Standardized Trade and Commerce, BSTC, didn't even look up from his data slate. "Dunno. Probably a calibration error." Blartok's top eye twitched. "A calibration error," he repeated, waving the report in front of Johnson's face. "This cargo ship, the USS Supply and Demand, filed a routine flight path submission this morning, and yet somehow the very same vessel has military-grade shield harmonics and railgun targeting parameters. Do you see the issue?" Johnson sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I see a lot of issues, boss, but none of them matter." "The paperwork is solid." Blartok emitted a sound best described as a gargled shriek. "You mean to tell me this clearly armed warship is legally recognized as a freight hauler?" "Yup." "But why? How?" Johnson swiped lazily on his slate. "Well, let's see. The United Systems Marine Corps classified their weapons as emergency hazardous material disposal tools. Their point defense turrets are high-speed parcel sorters. Their railgun, gravity redistribution device for infrastructure support." Blartok stared. "They renamed a planet-cracking railgun to pass a trade inspection?" Johnson yawned. "Yeah, I mean they submitted the paperwork, triple-stamped and everything. According to GANTS Trade Code 47B subsection 92, it's all legally sound." Blartok's tentacles curled into themselves in horror. This is a crime against regulation." Johnson scratched his chin. "If it was a crime, sir, we would have flagged it. But nope. Fully compliant." He leaned in with a smirk. "They're very good at paperwork." Blartok was about to explode when an alert blared across his desk. He slapped a tentacle on the console and pulled up the emergency report. The color drained from his face. "Oh no," he croaked. Johnson leaned over, sipping his coffee. "Something fun?" "Pirates," Blartok whispered. "They're attacking the USS Supply and Demand." Johnson blinked. Oh no. Deep in the void of space, Captain Bloodfang the Merciless stood on the bridge of his warship, the Doom's Embrace, watching his crew track their latest target, a defenseless, unsuspecting human cargo vessel. A cruel grin spread across his reptilian face. "Prepare the boarding teams. Today we feast." His first mate, a hunched insectoid named Click-Clack, hesitated. Captain? There's something odd about this vessel." Bloodfang frowned. "Odd? How?" Click-Clack flicked his mandibles. "Well, for one, it's moving. Strategically," Bloodfang scoffed. "It's a cargo ship." "Yes, Captain, but it's flanking us." Bloodfang frowned. "Cargo ships don't flank." "This one does." Before Bloodfang could respond, a robotic voice boomed across the comms. "Unregistered vessel. This is United Systems Commercial Logistics Ship Supply and Demand. You are in violation of Interstellar Freight Regulation 328J, subsection 14. Please state your cargo manifest and declare hazardous materials before proceeding." Bloodfang bared his fangs in amusement. "They think they can scare me with regulations? Open fire!" Plasma blasts erupted from the pirate fleet, streaking towards the human vessel. They never landed. The moment the first bolt hit the Supply and Demand's shields, 1,000 things happened at once. Hidden hull panels slid open, revealing a devastating array of weaponry. Missiles launched. Missiles labeled as Expedited Hazardous Waste Removal Units. Auto turrets spun to life, marked as Advanced Parcel Sorting Mechanisms. A railgun, a gravity redistribution tool capable of splitting moons, came online with a deep, thrumming hum. Bloodfang's jaw hung open. "Oh," he croaked. The Supply and Demand fired. A single missile struck the Doom's embrace. Bloodfang barely had time to register the impact before the entire starboard section of his ship ceased to exist. The pirate fleet was thrown into chaos as more expedited hazardous waste removal systems turned their ships into space debris. Click-clack clung to his console. "Captain, we appear to be catastrophically outgunned." Bloodfang whirled in panic. "They're a cargo ship." "They're a marine cargo ship." Bloodfang stared in horror as the human ship transmitted another message. "Unregistered. Vessel, your safety is important to us. Please remain calm while we process your surrender. Failure to comply will result in additional expedited deliveries." Bloodfang gulped. "We surrender." Back at the bureau, Blartok and Johnson watched the battle unfold on their monitors. Blartok slumped in his chair, trembling. "They just wiped out an entire pirate fleet." Johnson took another sip of coffee. "Uh-huh. With shipping labels." Johnson nodded. "It's almost like we approved it." Blartok moaned and curled into himself. "Oh, sweet regulatory compliance. We've doomed the galaxy." The debris field of what was once Captain Bloodfang's pirate fleet drifted in silent, defeated clumps across the void. The USS Supply and Demand hadn't even taken a scratch. In fact, the Marines aboard had already filed their after-action reports, triple-checked for compliance, and submitted them to the Bureau of Standardized Trade and Commerce, BSTC, before the last pirate ship had even exploded. On the bridge of the Supply and Demand, Sergeant Major Thomas Tomahawk Grayson stood, with arms crossed, surveying the wreckage on his monitor. His uniform, which technically registered him as a senior freight operations manager, was crisp, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Lieutenant Maria Vasquez, disguised under the rank of logistics routing specialist, casually flipped through a data slate. "Well," she said, "that was predictable." Grayson grunted in agreement. "Regrettable misuse of resources. We'll have to file an official complaint." Vasquez smirked. "Against the pirates?" "No," Grayson replied. "Against GANTS. They clearly failed to provide an accurate risk assessment for interstellar shipping routes. We were put at unnecessary risk." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "So we're filing a complaint because they didn't warn us about pirates attacking us?" Grayson nodded. "Bureaucracy is war, Lieutenant. We must fight on all fronts." Vasquez chuckled and swiped on her slate, typing up an official grievance. She attached a classified recording of the engagement, ensured all regulatory clauses were cited correctly, and hit submit. Within moments, the complaint arrived at the desk of Chief Inspector Blartok, who was already sweating tentacle fluid through his office chair. He stared at the document in horror. "Johnson." His voice was a whisper of despair. Gregory Johnson, who had long since embraced the inevitable futility of life in interstellar bureaucracy, leaned back in his chair, feet propped up on his desk. "They're..." Blartok swallowed. "They're complaining to us?" Johnson took the datapad and skimmed it. "Yep. Filing a formal grievance against inadequate risk mitigation on trade routes." "But they annihilated the, pirates," Johnson nodded. "Yeah, but technically their shipping route was disrupted." Blartok stared at the ceiling as if praying to the stars for release. Johnson, we approved their weaponized cargo fleet without knowing it, and now we're being held accountable for not warning them about the very pirates they just obliterated." Johnson sipped his coffee. "That's about the size of it, yeah." Blartok emitted a long, strangled groan. "And they sent the complaint through official channels." Johnson smirked. "They're following regulations, sir." "You do love regulations." Blartok's tentacles curled in pure, existential agony. There must be something we can do. Some clause. Some loophole." Johnson shrugged. "We could escalate it to the Galactic Security Council." Blartok, already in despair, let out a single hollow laugh. "Yes, fine. Let's involve the Security Council. Maybe, just maybe, the admirals of the galaxy will have a better grasp of this madness than I do. Johnson, knowing full well that this was absolutely not going to go how Blartok hoped, sent the complaint up the bureaucratic chain. 1 hour later, the highest-ranking military officials in the Galactic Alliance were gathered in an emergency session. Admiral Zircon of the Yentari Defense Armada sat at the head of the meeting, his serpentine face frozen in deep contemplation. Around him, a dozen other admirals, generals, and high-ranking strategists from various interstellar species murmured and grumbled. A massive holo display showed the supply and demand's engagement, which had been captured from a variety of sensor feeds. The footage showed a peaceful, unsuspecting cargo ship being approached by Bloodfang's pirate fleet. Then, in a stunning and terrifying display of efficiency, the freight hauler legally reclassified its weapons mid-battle, filed the appropriate forms, and proceeded to reduce the pirates to space dust, all while filing a complaint about the inconvenience. Admiral Zircon let out a slow breath. So, no one spoke. Zircon gestured to the footage. That is a cargo ship? Silence. Admiral Vylok, a 4-armed amphibian with a distinguished military record, finally cleared. His throat. Legally, yes. Zircon's tail twitched. That cargo ship possesses a railgun that can split a planet in half. General Uthgav, a massive reptilian from the Drezkari Empire, scratched his scaled chin. To be fair, it is registered as an orbital infrastructure stabilizer. Zircon's eyes narrowed. And their missile batteries? Vylok coughed. Expedited hazardous waste removal units. Zircon stared. And the point defense turrets? A junior officer at the table who had made the unfortunate mistake of reading too deeply into the paperwork meekly responded. They're legally advanced parcel sorters. Silence. Zircon exhaled slowly. So, let me understand this correctly. The humans have bypassed every known military restriction by renaming their warships into shipping vessels? Uthgav nodded. Yes, and no one caught this? Vylok hesitated. No, because they filed all the paperwork correctly. Zircon's jaw clenched. And we approved it. Zircon's eyes glowed with the light of 1,000 bureaucratic failures. We have unknowingly allowed humanity to construct the largest, most lethal fleet in galactic history under the guise of freight logistics. No one said anything. Zircon slammed his fist on the table. How many of these ships exist? The junior officer at the end of the table hesitated, checking his data pad. Then he turned pale. According to filed records, 3,762. The room went deathly silent. Zircon's fingers curled into a fist. 3,700 warships. Uthgav cleared his throat. Technically, logistics vessels. Zircon seethed. With planet-cracking weaponry. Vylok nodded. Yes, but legally. Zircon slammed his hands on the table. We approved 3,700 military-grade cargo. Ships and no one realized it? The entire room shifted uncomfortably. Zircon inhaled deeply, then exhaled. Fine. We fix this. We undo the paperwork. The doors to the chamber burst open. A terrified aide ran in, holding a fresh data slate. Sir. Zircon took it. He read it. His face went completely still. What now? Uthgav asked. Zircon exhaled slowly and read aloud. To the Galactic Security Council, on behalf of the United Systems of Earth, we appreciate the continued cooperation of the Galactic Alliance in ensuring interstellar trade remains efficient and regulated. Due to recent pirate activities, we are requesting additional authorization to expand our logistics fleet by an additional 20,000 vessels. All paperwork has been submitted in triplicate. Silence. The Galactic Alliance had just lost a war, and they hadn't even realized they were fighting one. Zircon read the document a second time, then a third, hoping the words would somehow change. They did not. The United Systems of Earth was requesting authorization for an additional 20,000 logistics vessels. If the pattern held, and it would, because the humans were insidious, regulation-loving monsters, each of these ships would be another heavily armed war machine disguised under bureaucratic nonsense. A cold sweat settled over the Galactic Security Council chamber. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Admiral Vilok, still clutching onto the last shreds of sanity, croaked out a single desperate thought. We could deny the request. Zarkan let out a hollow laugh. Deny it? Deny it, you say? And what, pray tell, will be the justification? He waved the document in the air. Every box is checked. Every regulation is met. Every single form is signed, dated, and cross-referenced in accordance with our own bureaucratic standards. Vilok gulped. Maybe we revise the trade codes? The junior officer at the end of the table, still pale from the last revelation, cleared his throat. Sir, if I may. Revising trade codes requires a 6-cycle review period, plus an additional 12-cycle debate before ratification. Shere Khan's eye twitched. And how long would it take for the humans to file an appeal? Based on their efficiency? The junior officer hesitated. 3 hours. The room fell silent again. Shere Khan slumped back in his chair. So they'll have 20,000 new logistics warships before we even finish arguing about stopping them. Vilok rubbed his temples. Perhaps we should call them in. Meet with their leadership. Try to negotiate. Shere Khan exhaled sharply. And say what? Dear humans, we kindly request that you stop following the rules so aggressively because it's making us uncomfortable. Vilok winced. I mean, we could phrase it more diplomatically, Uthgav grumbled. I don't think diplomacy works when your opponent has mastered the art of weaponized bureaucracy. Shere Khan's gaze darkened. Then there is only one option left. The room leaned in. We must out-bureaucrat them. The GANTS Bureau of Standardized Trade and Commerce had never worked harder in its entire miserable existence. Departments that had been sluggish and inefficient for centuries suddenly found themselves horribly, terrifyingly awake. Regulations were rewritten. Loopholes were sealed. New restrictions were put into place overnight, so hastily cobbled together that even the most hardened bureaucrats felt a twinge of guilt. It was, by all accounts, a full-scale paperwork war. Forms that once took mere hours to approve now required redundant verifications, secondary and tertiary reviews, and at least one ceremonial debate about planetary ethics. GANTS threw everything they had at the problem. They revised ship classification. Requirements, forcing any vessel with weapons-grade energy output to be redesignated as a military craft. They redefined hazardous waste disposal laws, ensuring that missiles could no longer be labeled as expedited removal units. They even attempted, desperately, to impose a rational intent clause on all documentation, requiring ships to function in accordance with their stated purpose. It was beautiful. It was thorough. It was airtight. And it lasted exactly 2 weeks. On the 15th day, the humans responded. It wasn't a military response. There were no threats, no aggression. Just a single, well-organized, perfectly formatted counter-proposal. The document was 4,000 pages long. It dissected every new regulation, line by line. It found inconsistencies, contradictions, and outdated references buried deep in GANTS' own legislative archives. It cited obscure rulings that hadn't been touched in centuries, leveraging long-forgotten legal precedents to render every single amendment unenforceable. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a crushing, systematic annihilation. The moment the document hit the GANTS mainframe, every single one of their new restrictions collapsed under their own legal weight. The bureaucrats were stunned, demoralized, broken. Shere Khan sat at his desk, staring blankly at the report summary. He reached for a glass of water, hand trembling, "They've won," he muttered. "They've beaten us." Vilak, looking equally exhausted, simply nodded. "They found a loophole in the loophole fix. I didn't even know that was possible." Zircon buried his face in his hands. "They weaponized our own incompetence against us." A soft ping from the main console announced another incoming message. Zircon hesitated before tapping the display. It was from the United Systems of Earth. "Dear esteemed members of the Galactic Alliance, in recognition of our continued cooperative relationship, we have elected to offer our expertise in trade regulation compliance to assist with your ongoing legislative challenges. To that end, we have dispatched a team of specialists to your headquarters to provide training and guidance in accordance with intergalactic legal standards. We look forward to working together." The attachment contained an official roster of the team they were sending. Zircon's eyes scanned the list. Then they widened in horror. Each name was followed by a title: Master Compliance Officer, Senior Interstellar Regulatory Strategist, Executive Bureaucratic Analyst, Logistics Warfare Specialist. Zircon exhaled slowly. "They're sending Marines," Uthgav groaned. "And they're doing it legally," Vilak shuddered. "We let them inside our own bureaucracy." Zircon clenched his fists. "We didn't just lose the paperwork war. We invited the victors into our house. Somewhere, in the depths of space, aboard one of their thousands of perfectly legal warships, the United Systems Marine Corps was watching and waiting. The arrival of the United Systems of Earth's regulatory specialists was unlike anything the Galactic Alliance had ever experienced. When diplomatic envoys came to GANTS headquarters, they usually arrived in sleek, luxurious vessels. The humans? They sent a cargo ship. It was, on paper, a simple transport vessel. The USS Shipping Manifest docked at Tax Form 9, the orbital hub of bureaucratic madness, without fanfare. Its exterior was plastered with dull corporate slogans, the kind designed to lull inspectors into a sense of mindless approval, efficiency through compliance. Regulatory excellence in motion. Proudly delivering trade solutions since 2245. It was harmless, except it absolutely was not. Chief Inspector Blartok stood at the docking bay, watching as the ship's ramp lowered. His tentacles were curled so tightly that his stress levels could probably be measured in astronomical units. He was not ready for this. A squad of humans in corporate uniforms marched down the ramp with precision that was decidedly not corporate. Their movements were too crisp, too disciplined, the way only military training could instill. Their uniforms were drab gray with Logistics Enforcement Division emblazoned across their chests, but their boots, military issue, their posture, absolutely not civilian. At their head was Senior Compliance Officer Hank Hardass McMillan. His title, of course, meant nothing. His rank in the United Systems Marine Corps, however, was general. Blartok swallowed as the broad-shouldered human approached with a practiced, polite expression. McMillan's face was carved from stone, his eyes unreadable behind the perfectly calibrated neutrality of an interstellar trade specialist. Chief Inspector Blartok. McMillan's voice was steady, professional. Blartok gulped. Senior Compliance Officer McMillan. McMillan nodded. On behalf of the United Systems of Earth, we appreciate this opportunity to collaborate on intergalactic regulatory efficiency. Blartok forced a weak smile. Yes. Wonderful. Behind McMillan, his team carried armored crates, their labels, bureaucratic processing units, data filing enhancement modules, legal documentation deployment platforms. But Blartok knew weapons cases when he saw them. They weren't even being subtle anymore. The humans got to work immediately. Their first act was to audit the auditors. McMillan's team set up in the GANTS headquarters, like they had always belonged there. Within hours, they had infiltrated every department, smiling, nodding, and making helpful suggestions that, somehow, resulted in humans gaining more control over interstellar trade. They combed through the laws with ruthless efficiency. They found contradictions no one had noticed in centuries. They pointed out inefficiencies so glaring that entire departments had to shut down for internal restructuring. Within 3 days, they had filed enough bureaucratic motions to dismantle half of GANT's existing power structures. By the end of the first week, they had restructured the Galactic Trade Oversight Division into something unrecognizable. Week 2, a terrifying realization settled over the Galactic Alliance. The humans weren't just playing along anymore. They were taking over. Legally. Xerkan sat in his office staring at the latest report. His hands were shaking. "They're replacing us." Vlok sat across from him, looking equally pale. "We let them inside our system, and now they're fixing it, faster than we can stop them." Xerkan's voice was hollow. "We can't even legally oppose them." Vlok hesitated. "Unless we go outside the law." Silence. Xerkan slowly turned to look at him. "You mean a coup?" Vlok swallowed. "It may be the only way. If we can't beat them in bureaucracy, we remove them by force." Xerkan closed his eyes. "We'd have to act fast." Before the door to his office opened. Xerkan and Vlok froze. Macmillan walked in. He moved calmly, deliberately, the same way a predator doesn't need to run because it knows you're already caught. "Gentlemen," Macmillan said, setting a datapad on Xerkan's desk. "I believe you've been reviewing unauthorized organizational disruption protocols." Xerkan's throat went dry. Macmillan smiled. "Don't worry. We already filed the paperwork for you." Xerkan's stomach dropped. Macmillan tapped the datapad. "This is an official documentation of your intent to disrupt a recognized regulatory body. It falls under Trade Compliance Violation 67B. As per Galactic law, that constitutes an immediate hostile action against interstellar commerce." Xerkan stared in horror. "You preemptively filed a coup attempt against us?" Macmillan's polite expression didn't waver. "Of course. We believe in proactive risk mitigation," Vlok sputtered. That's ridiculous." Macmillan tapped another document. "Oh, and under Emergency Trade Stabilization Act 114, we have the authority to request military support to prevent such disruptions." Xerkan's breath caught in his throat. Macmillan's fleet was already on its way. 3 days later, the Galactic Alliance officially dissolved GANTs. They didn't have a choice. With human-backed compliance teams now controlling trade regulations, their influence spread throughout the entire interstellar economy. Planets that once answered to the Galactic Security Council now filed paperwork directly with Earth, trade disputes, mediated by human auditors, military conflicts, reclassified as civil trade enforcement actions. Entire planetary defense fleets were legally rebranded as corporate security assets. The Galactic Alliance didn't just lose a war, they had been acquired. Months later, aboard the USS Supply and Demand, General Macmillan stood at the bridge, sipping coffee. A junior officer approached. "Sir, the final compliance reports from the Galactic Alliance are in," Macmillan nodded. "And?" The officer smiled. "They've fully integrated. Every sector is operating under our trade compliance protocols." Macmillan exhaled contentedly. "Good. That means the war is officially over." The officer hesitated. Sir?" "Technically, there was never a war." Macmillan grinned. "Exactly. In the vast, ever-expanding bureaucracy of the galaxy, the Marines had won. And they hadn't fired a single legally recognized shot.